The spring of 1940 was eerily quiet across Western Europe. Streets lay empty, fields were undisturbed, and a strange, uneasy calm settled over the land. It was as if the continent was holding its breath, waiting for something to break the silence. For 8 long months after Germany invaded Poland, Britain and France waited, watching fortified borders, hoping the real war would never come. Soldiers stood guard in their trenches, peering across no man's land, uncertain if or when the enemy would strike. This so-called Phoney War lulled the Allies into a false sense of security. Life in the camps became routine, with soldiers passing time, convinced that the worst might be avoided. They trusted in their defenses, especially the mighty Maginot Line, convinced it was impenetrable. French commanders believed their concrete fortresses and heavy guns would stop any German advance, but in Berlin, Hitler and his generals were preparing something new, a war of speed and violence, not attrition. They studied maps, devised strategies, and planned a campaign that would catch the Allies off guard. On May 10, 1940, the silence shattered. Explosions echoed at dawn, and the world awoke to the thunder of war machines. German forces stormed into the Netherlands, Belgium, and Luxembourg, moving with a speed and coordination that stunned the world. The real war had begun, unfolding with a speed and ferocity no one in Paris or London could imagine. Civilians fled in terror and chaos spread as the German advance seemed unstoppable. The German plan was audacious, not just to defeat but to annihilate the Allied armies in a single blow. Their goal was total victory, achieved with ruthless efficiency. This was Blitzkrieg, lightning war, where tanks, planes, and infantry worked together in a devastating new way. The sky filled with Stuka bombers while panzer columns raced ahead, overwhelming defenses before they could react. In just 6 weeks, the fate of France and all of Europe would be decided. City after city fell, and the front line shifted with dizzying speed. The world was about to witness one of the most stunning military victories in history. The Allies, caught off guard, could only watch as their lines crumbled. The Allies' old strategies were about to be swept aside. Their carefully laid plans and static defenses proved useless against the new German tactics. The calm was over. The storm had arrived, and with it, a new era of warfare that would change Europe forever. Europe would never be the same. Millions would be displaced, and the continent would be plunged into chaos and destruction. The Phoney War was finished. The real test had begun. The world would soon learn the true cost of underestimating the enemy. To truly grasp the shock that swept across Europe in May 1940, we must first look back at the decades that shaped the continent. The world of the 1930s was still deeply scarred by the trauma of the First World War, and the shadow of that conflict loomed over every decision and every hope for peace. Europe was haunted by memories of unimaginable loss, especially France, which had lost an entire generation. Determined never to suffer such devastation again, the French people and their leaders were gripped by a powerful desire to avoid another catastrophe. In response, France poured its hopes and resources into massive fortifications, building the Maginot Line and focusing on defense. They believed that if war came again, it would be slow, grinding, and fought from behind walls of concrete and steel. Meanwhile, Germany, humiliated and economically crippled by the Treaty of Versailles, was transformed under Hitler's rule. The nation became a militaristic power, driven by a thirst for revenge and a vision of expansion that would soon threaten all of Europe. Across the Channel, Britain watched anxiously. Separated by water, many hoped to avoid another land war, clinging to memories of peace. But Hitler's relentless aggression and the rise of fascism forced Britain to reconsider its isolation. When Germany invaded Poland in September 1939, Britain and France were left with no choice. They declared war, reluctantly stepping into a conflict they had desperately tried to prevent, knowing the cost could be immense. By the spring of 1940, the stage was set. The Allies, powerful but defensive and still haunted by the horrors of the past, now faced a resurgent, aggressive Germany, ready to rewrite the rules of war. Expecting a repeat of the First World War, the Allies positioned their best forces in Belgium, convinced that history would unfold as it had before. But this assumption would prove disastrous, as the enemy had learned from the past and was prepared to strike in unexpected ways. The Germans, with new tactics and overwhelming speed, were ready to exploit every Allied mistake, turning caution into vulnerability. Europe now stood on the brink of a new kind of war, one that would move faster, strike harder, and leave millions in fear and uncertainty. The old world, with its hopes and certainties, was about to be swept away by the storm of total war, forever changing the face of the continent. On paper, the Allies seemed stronger, more soldiers, more tanks, and the formidable French army. Their forces boasted some of the most advanced tanks of the era, and their numbers inspired confidence across Europe. The British Expeditionary Force stood ready alongside the French, determined to halt the German advance. Their plan, the Dyle Plan, was defensive: rush into Belgium, form a line, and stop the Germans there. The Allies believed that by meeting the enemy on Belgian soil, they could avoid the devastation of another invasion of France and protect their vital industrial heartland. The Maginot Line anchored their confidence, but it was a false sense of security. This massive line of fortifications stretched along the French-German border, but it left the Ardennes forest, thought impassable, vulnerable, and lightly defended. The Germans, led by innovative commanders like Manstein and Guderian, had a different vision. They saw opportunity where others saw obstacles, and they were determined to rewrite the rules of warfare. The Manstein Plan, or sickle cut, aimed to lure Allied armies into Belgium with a decoy, then strike the real blow elsewhere. The Germans would feint in the north, drawing Allied strength away from their true target. German panzer divisions, concentrated and mobile, would punch through weak points, bypassing strongholds. Their speed and coordination would allow them to encircle the enemy before they could react. The French scattered their tanks among infantry, while the Germans grouped theirs for maximum impact. This difference in tactics would prove decisive, as the Germans unleashed the full power of their armored spearheads. The Allies were preparing for the last war. The Germans were inventing the next one. While Allied commanders relied on old doctrines and slow communication, the Germans embraced speed, surprise, and modern technology. The stage was set for a clash of doctrines. Two visions of war, old and new, would soon collide on the fields of Western Europe. The coming days would reveal whose vision would prevail. Soldiers on both sides braced themselves for the unknown, aware that history was about to be made. The fate of nations hung in the balance. Families waited anxiously for news, and cities prepared for the worst as the world watched events unfold. The world was about to witness a revolution in warfare. The coming battle would change the course of history and redefine how wars would be fought for generations to come. Blitzkrieg, lightning war, was more than tanks and planes. It was a new philosophy: speed, surprise, and concentrated force. The goal was to paralyze the enemy, striking at command centers and supply lines, creating panic and confusion. Panzer divisions smashed through narrow fronts, bypassing resistance, while motorized infantry followed to mop up. Above, Stuka dive bombers terrorized defenders, shattering morale before the tanks even arrived. The Allies clung to outdated ideas of continuous front lines and slow-moving orders. German commanders led from the front, making real-time decisions by radio. The speed of the German advance overwhelmed Allied decision-making. By the time reports reached Allied HQ, the panzers were already miles ahead. The Germans turned Allied strengths against them, drawing their best armies north. When the real attack came through the Ardennes, the Allies were out of position. Blitzkrieg shattered the old rules of war. The Allies were caught completely off guard. The heart of the German plan was a surprise attack through the Ardennes, a region the French considered impassable for tanks. Confident the terrain would protect them, the French left the sector lightly defended. On May 10th, while attention was on the north, the main German force began its push through the forest. Nearly 2,000 tanks and 1 million men squeezed through narrow roads, undetected by Allied air reconnaissance. By May 12th, German spearheads reached the Meuse River, stunning the French defenders. The Luftwaffe bombed relentlessly, and German engineers crossed the river under fire. By May 13th, the Germans had secured crossings at Sedan. The door to France was open. The panzers didn't turn to fight the main Allied armies. They raced west for the Channel, cutting off supply lines and retreat. The Allied command structure collapsed under the shock. The sickle cut was in motion. France was now wide open to invasion. With German panzers racing to the coast, the British Expeditionary Force and the best French and Belgian divisions were trapped. Their only hope was escape through the port of Dunkirk. Then, unexpectedly, Hitler ordered his tanks to halt just short of the port, a pause that remains controversial. This gave the Allies a crucial window. The Royal Navy launched Operation Dynamo, a mass evacuation. Hundreds of civilian boats, fishing vessels, yachts, lifeboats joined the rescue, braving bombs and gunfire. For 9 days, soldiers queued on the beaches under constant attack, waiting for rescue. Against all odds, over 338,000 Allied troops were evacuated. Dunkirk was a military disaster, but the evacuation became a symbol of resilience and hope. The core of the British Army was saved to fight another day. The war was far from over. France's fate now hung by a thread. While Dunkirk captured the world's attention, France was collapsing. The best French divisions were lost in the north, the rest were stretched thin and demoralized. The Germans launched the second phase of their invasion, smashing through weakened French lines. Paris was declared an open city to spare it destruction. And on June 14th, German troops entered the capital unopposed. The sight of Nazi flags in Paris shocked the world. The French government fled, divided between those who wanted to fight on and those who sought peace. Marshal Pétain, believing resistance was futile, announced he would seek an armistice. In just 6 weeks, France, once Europe's strongest army, was utterly defeated. The world watched in disbelief. The map of Europe was being redrawn. Hitler staged the French surrender for maximum humiliation, forcing the armistice to be signed in the same railway carriage as Germany's 1918 defeat. The terms were harsh. Germany occupied most of France, the French army was disbanded, and the country was divided. The Vichy regime led by Marshal Pétain collaborated with the Nazis, while France was torn apart politically and spiritually. From London, Charles de Gaulle called on the French to resist, launching the Free French movement. His broadcast became a beacon of hope for those refusing to surrender. Britain now stood alone against Nazi Germany, its navy, the last line of defense. The United States, still neutral, began increasing aid to Britain. The war had entered a new, more dangerous phase. Hitler was master of continental Europe. The path to Allied victory would be long and bloody. The world had changed forever. The Battle of France was a turning point in military history. Blitzkrieg proved that speed and mechanization had replaced static trench warfare. Armies worldwide scrambled to adapt to this new reality. The Allies' failure was not of courage, but of imagination. They could not conceive of such rapid, bold attacks. Germany's victory seemed unstoppable, fueling Hitler's overconfidence. But Blitzkrieg's limits would soon be tested in the vastness of the Soviet Union. The fall of France left Britain isolated and set the stage for the next great battles. The 6 weeks from May to June 1940 reshaped Europe and the war. The terrifying power of modern warfare was now clear to all. The world would never be the same.